Well, welcome to the root of all evil. Guys, they don't think it's funny, Mike, the whole root of all evil. I said, welcome, they just all stared at me. Oh, you guys are going to be a tough bunch, aren't you?
We're a tough crowd.
Darn. Okay.
Sorry I'm late.
That's okay.
This is Robin Boness from Lacombe. She works for Alberta Agriculture, and she's going to lead off talking about pea root rots.
I am. And then we're going to follow up. Dr. Ron Howard, he just snuck over there for a minute. He's going to come back and talk to you guys about Clubroot and some of the issues surrounding it. And then Dr. Harding from Brooks, he's from Alberta Agriculture in Brooks, and he's going to talk a little bit about the what's the word? The correlation or of glyphosate and the potential fusarium in our soils. Okay, so I'm going to start off. Fusarium root rot is one of the big issues that we face kind of all across the province, and I'm going to talk to it just as how it applies to pulse crops. Okay, fusarium is part of a root rot complex that I'm sure you guys have all heard about ad nauseum. There's 3 of them: Rhizoctonia, Pythium, and fusarium that are involved in that, and potentially a 4th one called Aphanomyces that might be starting to show its ugly head. But fusarium is by far the one that gets the most attention. Okay, and fusarium in peas is as a typical problem. The root rots are a typical problem. We see them almost every year depending on environmental conditions. And so the reason why fusarium is getting a lot more attention is because it tends to be sticking around a little bit longer and affecting our crops later on. Our crops are getting up into flower and starting to pod, and then all of a sudden fusarium rears its ugly head and our crops go down. Okay, so that's one of the things that's one of the reasons why it's been gaining a bit more momentum. Okay, I should mention that the fusarium that I'm talking about is, for the most part, Fusarium avinaceum. Okay, it's a little bit different, it's a different species than the Fusarium head blight. There is a bunch of fusarium. There's solani, there's a whole bunch of them. But avinaceum is one that we isolate the most in Alberta, that is affecting our pulse crops. And it is not host specific across the pulses. So it'll attack faba beans the same as it attacks peas, as lentils, as all the way across the board. So crop rotation is one of the things that we stress with this disease. But if you're going to put another pulse crop in there, you're not necessarily going to fix the problem. And the other reason why fusarium is a problem is because it does live for such a long time in the soil. And one of the sad things that we're seeing in the pulse industry right now is we're trying to promote pulses and get people to grow them more and get more attention to them. And then so we have our pulse producers that have been growing these peas or maybe starting to branch out a little bit. They're the ones that are having the biggest problems, because in a 4 or 5 year rotation with peas over 20 years, we're getting calls. I've been growing peas for 20 years and it's been doing fantastic, and now all of a sudden they're dying. What the heck is going on? Okay, so when we're going out and sampling, we're finding fusarium. Okay, it doesn't mean that that is the only thing that's happening. There's a 4-year project that we're starting this year. It's part of Growing Forward. It's got lots of funding from ASTF and the Alberta Pulse Growers. We're going to do a really intense survey across the province and get a really firm handle on what this problem is, where it's affecting, what exactly it is. We're going to do some DNA work and stuff, maybe get to the bottom of it. Okay, so fusarium, here's a typical pot where this is a plant that maybe didn't quite get fusarium when I inoculated it, and here's one that did. Okay, so pretty obvious. What you'll see is stunting or yellowing or kind of different things going on with the plant, which is probably pretty normal. So I'm going to try to dig this out, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of luck as to can show you guys exactly what it looks like. Okay. So this is a perfect, although it's small, I apologize you guys, example of what fusarium will do to the roots. Okay, it's very small, very spindly, and if you look at it very closely, sorry, you got a really great, yeah. If you look at it very closely, you'll see that it's bright red. Okay, I can pass that around. You all got popsicles in your hands. All right, so you don't want to pass the dirty plant around. Fair enough. Okay. Anyway, I will pass that around. That's what it looks like in the seedling stage, okay? The fusarium that I was talking about earlier that we're starting to see a little bit later looks very similar, okay? I'll pass this picture around just because it's such a beautiful picture, okay, of what fusarium actually does. So if you're questioning whether or not you have fusarium in your field, dig it up, slice it open, and then you will for sure know, okay? Like I said, this is Fusarium avinaceum. There are some other fusariums. This one tends to stay mostly in the root and climb a little bit throughout the plant. It can go up into the third, fourth leaf up and work its way up a little bit. I haven't personally seen it go that far. There's another fusarium that does completely wilt the whole plant, and it's a little bit of a different beast, okay?
I have a question.
Sure.
Do you find them in patches or an odd plant here or there?
Definitely patchy. Okay, that's an excellent question. This is a terrible picture. I apologize. It looked beautiful on my computer, but my printer didn't agree. Okay, so this is a field. This brown area is a bit of a low area, kind of a waterlogging area. You can see the peas are doing fantastic here. They're doing great in the back, but all along here, close to the water, fusarium has come in. Okay, this is a big patch of fusarium. Okay, you won't necessarily see patches quite this big. Yeah, sometimes the patches you see are a little bit smaller, but it is very patchy.
I have another question. How
Sure.
do you tell the difference between that and Pythium root rot?
Okay, that's a hard question. It is difficult to tell them apart. Okay, Pythium is, we call it a water fungus. Okay, I call it that because you'll only see it when it's really wet. Okay, and it is not quite as specific. It'll just kind of go in and attack the plant wherever it feels like it. Okay, fusarium tends to start closer to the seed. Okay, and spread out a little bit. Not always. Okay, Rhizoctonia. When I see Rhizoctonia, it's pretty much right at just below the soil surface. Okay, when I first see it, but it will spread downward. Okay, I'll be the first person to say it is hard to tell them apart. Okay, but fusarium, fusarium bright red, Rhizoctonia, brownish, darkish colored, maybe not quite as moved quite as far. Pythium, mushy. Okay, wet. All right. Rule of thumb, don't hold me to that, okay? But that's kind of what I use when I first go into the field, okay? So I don't have much more time. I just want to make a couple comments about, they are not host specific to the pulses, so they will kind of spread. The best way to control them is with the seed treatments and crop rotation. Those are really the only two things that we have to really control these diseases. The later onsetting fusarium, if you call me and your plots are this tall, and there's fusarium, I got nothing for you. Okay? The best and absolute defense we have against any of the root rots, especially fusarium, is plant vigor. Someone else talked about that this morning. The healthier your crop is, okay, I think it was Jeremy talked about that. The healthier your crop is, the high quality seeds you use, you control your weeds, all that stuff that we harper at you all the time to do. If you do that, a lot of these plants will grow through the initial seedling blights, okay? And the healthier it is, the more chance it has of survival, okay? And I'd better stop talking. Does anybody have any questions before I hand this off to Mike?
Would there be any point in testing background levels of fusarium in fields, and could that affect your crop choice?
Well, fusarium, you're going to find it in every single field, every single year, no matter what. So testing for the presence of it is not something that I would recommend, but maybe, potentially, but testing for the levels of it, yes, maybe. But unfortunately, it won't exactly paint a clear picture, Ken, because it'll depend upon the year, it'll depend on all kinds of stuff. There's almost always so much stuff going on. The best way I can answer that is to say that the biggest problems we've been seeing is in long-time pea growers. The inoculum levels are obviously building.
Are certain strains more vigorous in infection than others?
Absolutely. Yep, good question. Some of them are very aggressive and some of them don't cause a problem at all. So it'll depend upon the strain that you have in your field, okay? We find it in high areas, low areas, dry fields, wet fields, sandy soils, clay soils. We find it everywhere. Whether or not it's going to be a problem will depend on the environment, the aggressiveness of the pathogen, and how healthy that crop was to start with.
One of the reasons I ask is we were involved in a big fusarium head blight study, and we would sample the stubble and analyze the different strains in the stubble itself.
Most definitely.
Certain ones were obviously worse than others.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't, obviously, we were trying to find the ones with high levels and
Yeah.
so we could study the wheat infection, but
Yeah.
would that translate into root rot as well, or just
The-
into the headlights?
The Avanasium that I'm talking about is isolated off the wheat heads. Most definitely it is, but it's not a problem per se in the fusarium headlight because it doesn't produce the DONs, the toxins. So they do find it when they isolate it from the heads of wheat and stuff. So it is kind of there, but it's not contributing to the big FHB problem that we're having. So
I guess what I was asking, would it be reverse? Would it be contributing to the root rot problems?
I don't think so, because Fusarium graminearum is the big one that they talk about in the headlights.
Yeah.
We don't isolate that one off our roots very often at all. So
What about Calmorum?
Calmorum is one that we isolate a little bit, yeah. 80% of it is Avanasium though. So that's a good question that I don't know the answer to 100%.
That was my goal.
Thank you very much. Embarrassing in front of others and on camera too.
We have to identify which of the tough questions.
There's a lot we don't know about why it's a problem and how it relates to other stuff. I don't know. But hopefully this 4-year study that we're taking on will help answer some of those questions. Exactly what it is, where it is, why it is, what it looks like, and what we can do.
Is it only in peas or are you seeing it in lentils too?
It's non-host specific in pulses. I said that, you weren't here.
And so,
I'm peeing.
did you talk about the
gotta pee.
rotation then as well? The number of years? 4 is maybe not enough because it depends on the weather and bigger.
Well, if you want to avoid it completely, you'll have to do like 10 or 12 or 15. Not going to happen,
Once in a lifetime
right?
kind
So,
of crop.
but there's definitely a correlation between the amount of inoculum that is building and how many times you put the pea back in that field, right? So, if the more you spread them out, the better chance you have. So, yeah.
And Robin, the other thing you mentioned was that if an isolate is really aggressive on peas,
Yep.
it's not usually aggressive on cereals or
Yep.
necessarily lentils. So your rotation still gives you an advantage.
Yep.
It doesn't cure the problem, but if you have a really aggressive isolate on peas and you go in within a cereal and a lentil and a canola, then the population of that aggressive isolate diminishes enough that you can go back again with peas and you won't have a wreck.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike.
You already said that. I just
Okay. Anyway, I think I'm out of time. Any last questions before I hand this off? Okay.
Thanks, Robin. I'm going to go ahead and talk about the glyphosate issue in case Dr. Howard is able to be back to talk about Clubroot. So Dr. Howard is potentially going to be talking to you about Clubroot and sanitization of equipment to prevent the spread of Clubroot. If he's not back in time, I'll cover off for him, and that'll be sorry for you guys. I can definitely speak to it, but I'm no Dr. Howard. So glyphosate. The topic here that we're talking about is the idea that herbicides can affect plant diseases. So the primary reason to apply a herbicide is to control weeds, but sometimes there's an indirect effect that can cause plant diseases to become more problematic. And so this is a phenomenon that's been described since the 70s, and it's usually a very specific interaction. So this very specific herbicide active ingredient, when we apply it to a field, will cause some very specific interaction with microorganisms either in the soil or whatever that causes a pathogen to have a competitive advantage or compromises the host's ability to mount a defense against the pathogen. And so very recently glyphosate was implicated in a situation that increases the likelihood or aggressiveness or potential for fusarium diseases. Now there are a couple of other soil-borne fungi that cause diseases that people have said glyphosate may play a role in as well, but really it's the fusarium diseases that have got the most attention. And so those diseases would include root rots like the ones Robin just talked about in many different types of crops, and also things like fusarium head blight in cereals. And so I'll tell you why this concern has been raised. Some research done in greenhouses and laboratory experiments showed that microorganisms, when we apply glyphosate to the soil, microorganisms respond by metabolizing the glyphosate. You probably are all aware that when glyphosate hits the soil, it's inactivated very quickly because microorganisms break it down. And so that changes the subpopulations of microbes in the soil. It doesn't necessarily all of the microorganisms disappear and new ones come in, but some subpopulations change in their relative concentrations or percentages. And that shouldn't be a big surprise to anyone, because even if we add water to the soil consistently, it's going to change what populations do best. Robin just described that in wet years, when there's a lot of water in the soil, Pythium is a big problem. In dry years, Pythium not a big problem. So when we add things like water or herbicides and they get into the soil, it changes these subpopulations. What's predicted for glyphosate, or hypothesized, is that there are at least two things happening. One is that it may create a competitive advantage for disease-causing fusarium species, and their levels either don't decrease with time or they may increase with time. So normally when we rotate away from susceptible crops, the levels of the pathogens drop because they don't compete quite as well in the soil environment as the saprophytes and other organisms. So having glyphosate in the soil may provide fusarium with a nutrient source that allows it to remain competitive longer. The other thing that's hypothesized is that there are subpopulations of gram-positive bacteria in the soil that when they metabolize the glyphosate, they increase in population, and they also scavenge and retain micronutrients in the soil like manganese, magnesium, zinc. And these are micronutrients that are quite important in plant defense. So if the plants can't get at these micronutrients in the soil, they become compromised in their ability to mount a defense. So there are probably 10 or 15 other hypotheses of how glyphosate may cause these problems. I'm just, in the interest of time, going to leave it at there to let you know that these are some things that have been hypothesized based on this laboratory and greenhouse work. So the real question probably that we would ask today is, in my commercial fields, where especially those that I have glyphosate tolerant cropping systems in, is glyphosate going to create a fusarium problem for me? And the answer to that question in commercial production systems is that we don't really know yet. And the reason for that is that the best information we have to indicate that glyphosate would be an issue comes from surveys done where they take the glyphosate tolerant, they take fields that have a history of glyphosate tolerant cropping, and they compare the survey results with fields that haven't had a history of glyphosate, and they can see a consistent increase in fusarium diseases in those fields. So there's a correlation. Does that mean glyphosate is causing fusarium? No, because the rotation is different in those fields, the environment would be different in those fields, the varieties would be different, and those things like variety, rotation, and environment have such a huge effect on fusarium diseases that we can't separate out the glyphosate effect. So we don't really know for sure yet. So the answer is has become a really polarized topic. Some people say, yeah, glyphosate's really causing fusarium issues. Some people say, baloney, this is not an issue. And so we have this controversy kind of in development, and we need more science. And so one of the things that Farming Smarter has done is established a demonstration plot, which we'll show you on your way over to Kevin Zachuk's seed quality session over there. And that demonstration is an excellent example of how we may be able to, in the future, design some replicated studies over a long period of time that could answer this question as to whether glyphosate is really an issue. Questions? I think Ken's going to have a comment.
I always have questions.
Good.
You guys are doing an awesome job. The correlation study that you talked about, fields with glyphosate, fields without, could it be a logical argument that the fields with glyphosate were likely under a zero tillage system or a min-till system, and fields without were probably more conventional and cultivated? So in a zero-till system, and Newton talked about, much more organic matter and basically a lot more food sources for pathogens in general. Is that not a possible explanation why we could be potentially falsely accusing glyphosate of this?
Yes, and the study showed that, and I didn't talk about this, I apologize. The study showed that zero-till fields actually had a consistently higher level of common root rot. It was the minimum tillage fields that had the fusarium issues. And that correlation with minimum tillage was as great as the glyphosate correlation. So again, we don't know the answers yet. We see pointing in a few directions that could all affect fusarium. We know that environment does, we know tillage does, we know rotation does. Does glyphosate? Maybe.
So is there a difference between the three different salts you can get as a carrier for glyphosate, or is it specific to glyphosate more so than the surfactant?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. The information that I've read has all just been on the glyphosate. Yeah, I don't know. Does anybody have a comment on that? I'm not aware of any work that's been done.
There was something that was produced where they said the ingredients in the Weather Max, which we know is a high-end product, is way more toxic. There's some carriers in there, is way more toxic than the glyphosate actually is long-term for soil microbes.
Okay.
In the last year.
Yeah. So those carriers or surfactants or additives are also something going onto the field that are going to change those subpopulations of microorganisms. With respect to fusarium, I've only seen information on glyphosate. So I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question. Okay. When we're finished with the Clubroot part, we'll walk down towards Kevin's presentation and I'll show you the demonstration on glyphosate that Ken and his group have set up here. It's on page 25 of your handout, so as you walk past you can see the plot descriptions. But we'll turn it over now to Dr. Ron Howard to talk about Clubroot. Oh, yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to talk about Clubroot, which is this disease over here. Is that working?
You're on camera.
On camera, okay. I should have brushed my teeth. Okay, so this is what Clubroot looks like. This is a healthy canola crop, 45H26 susceptible hybrid. This is what Clubroot did to that variety when it was inoculated. In other words, the Clubroot soil was infested with the organism and the seed planted there. So you'll see it causes stunting, it thins out the stand, it just looks unhealthy, and the yield would be a lot poorer. Clubroot is named for the galls or swellings that form on the root of the affected plants. It's caused by a soil-borne organism. The scientific name is Plasmodioptera brassicae. It's an old disease, and there are sort of anecdotal reports back even to the Roman times, many centuries ago, of a disease that affected fodder turnips and described, it sounds a lot like Clubroot. So it ended up in Alberta in canola in 2003, so we're at our 10th anniversary of having Clubroot in Alberta in canola. Although we had seen it previously back in the mid-70s in vegetable gardens in central Alberta. It really made headlines when it hit the canola crop because canola is a multi-billion-dollar crop, as you know, and anytime a disease, a pest, or something takes a run at a crop that valuable, a lot of people are going to sit up and take notice. 12 fields in Sturgeon County were found with it in 2003. As of 2012, in the last survey that we did, and I'll get Mike to pass out this survey report. We've got a nice map in here which I'm going to refer to. We are up to almost 1,100 fields now in 24 counties in Alberta that has this disease. It's just starting to make inroads into Saskatchewan and Manitoba, but we are Clubroot Center. We are the epicenter for Clubroot in the prairies and in Canada, in fact. It does occur in canola in Ontario and Quebec as well, but of course the big threat is here. Because all of our varieties were initially susceptible, it caused a lot of alarm and concern. And as you can see from this map, the bright red area is the area of highest intensity, and then the yellow areas are another step down in intensity. So we're talking about our core canola growing area in central Alberta. So far the deep south and the Peace for the most part have remained free of the disease. We do have 3 commercial fields in the county of Newell, the Brooks area, that have high levels of Clubroot, and there's economic damage that has occurred there in the past when they grew susceptible varieties. For canola producers, we recommend a 4-year rotation away from canola to give the clubroot spore population a chance to subside a little bit. The resting spore that the organism forms in those galled roots is very long-lived. Studies in Sweden have shown 17 plus years survival in the soil, so it's a fairly long-lived critter. So obviously we don't want to bring it here into southern Alberta or have it move into this area if we can prevent that. And one of the main means that we do that is making sure any farm equipment and machinery that we might bring out of central Alberta, or oil and gas field equipment, whatever, is cleaned and sterilized. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes just on the other side of the tent by our sanitation trailer. So we know clubroot's on the move. We know that in southern Alberta we could end up with it here eventually, and we need to prevent that from happening as long as we can before it gets here. This disease attacks members of the cabbage family, so mustard's fair game. If you're growing vegetables in your home garden or market gardens, they're susceptible to clubroot. It goes after cruciferous weeds, stinkweed, stinkweed, shepherd's purse, wild mustard. And in fact, a good way to scout for clubroot in your fields, go out and look at the stinkweed, pull them up, see if you've got galls on the roots or shepherd's purse, even in the absence of a canola crop. So if you have clubroot, rotation, as I mentioned, in the rotational crops, absolute must is to control those cruciferous weeds. Otherwise, it just keeps building up in population. Full-blown clubroot galls on canola can get as big as my hand. I've seen that in central Alberta. And when they get that big, they have billions of spores. And so this organism really reproduces quickly. And those spores, when the root dies and disintegrates, those spores get into the soil, and we stir them around when we do tillage practices. So minimum tillage is a means of actually reducing clubroot spread compared to conventional tillage. We want to make sure wind and water erosion are minimized in our fields. We want to clean our equipment. As I mentioned, I'll talk about that a little bit later. We actually want to start getting out and scouting for clubroot in our fields, and if we find it, hopefully it's just in a localized spot, and so you might flag that area off and avoid working in there with your equipment, and eventually maybe even consider liming those areas. This has been tried as a means of reducing the clubroot. We have an array of about 6 or 8 different resistant varieties of canola now that are standing up very well. The levels of resistance are high, and growers in the clubroot areas that may have seen near crop failures back 6-8 years ago, before these varieties were in common use, are growing these now and finding that the resistance is holding up well and they're getting decent yields. But we don't want to encourage growers to go with back-to-back canola production with these resistant varieties, because that resistance will break down over time. This has happened in Europe in oilseed rape, and we don't want to see that happen here. So if you're a canola producer and you're growing resistant varieties, we recommend that you rotate between companies, because they have different genetics in their resistant varieties, so that you don't get a consistent introduction of one type of germplasm. Rotate between companies, between herbicide systems, and that'll ensure good resistance stewardship. Okay, so for scouting your fields, the symptoms will start to show up when the plants are about 6 to 8 weeks old. You'll see the affected plants are stunted. You'll see how much shorter that crop is. The leaves will turn yellow, they'll wilt, and if you pop them out of the ground, you'll see that gall. Now, other diseases, of course, like sclerotinia and blackleg, will also stunt crops and kill them. So you want to make sure that you dig the roots up and look for clubroot. And if you find it, report it right away to your ag fieldman, and they'll advise you. They'll go through the Provincial Clubroot Management Plan, which is this publication here, and you're welcome to grab a copy of that. This is a declared pest under the Agricultural Pests Act of Alberta. So anybody who has clubroot, you must take steps to control or prevent it. Okay, so let's just slip around the corner here to our sanitation trailer. Okay, so in southern Alberta here, as I say, apart from those 3 fields in the county of Newell and a vegetable farm in Cypress County, we really haven't seen clubroot established in any canola fields. But we know our soil conditions could be conducive if it was introduced. We've got irrigation, which provides the moisture that the organism needs to reproduce and infect. We have cruciferous weeds and things like that could be susceptible hosts in our intervening rotational crops. And there's a lot of guys that are still growing susceptible varieties because down here we still grow those. In central Alberta, there's been a big switch over more to the resistant ones. And of course, southern Alberta is the center of our hybrid canola seed production, so we definitely don't want to jeopardize that. This organism does tag along on dust on seed and on farm equipment and that sort of thing. And the farm equipment, we typically find the highest levels of disease at the entrance to the field where machineries come in, sunk in, and shed the soil from previous fields that may have been infected. So cleaning equipment before you bring it into non-infested areas or onto farms that have no history of the disease is really critical. If you bought a used cultivator out of Leduc County or combine or tractor and it hadn't been cleaned, you just bought clubroot onto your farm here, and it's once it's there, it's going to be there for a long, long time. And so we want to do everything we can to prevent its introduction. So cleaning equipment is very important. And we have a trailer here that was provided to us by the Canola Council of Canada, and we've used this in our research and demonstration work for several years. I'm just going to get a placard here. This mobile sanitation unit, as we call it, has a Hotsy pressure washer steamer unit. We can do both steaming and pressure washing with it. We have water tank and generators and so on, so we can go to farms. We don't need a water source, we don't need power. We can do all of our testing on farm. So we've taken this piece of equipment, for example, to the farm in the Bassano area with clubroot, and we have cleaned and disinfected tractors and cultivators and pivot towers and high clearance sprayers, and we've monitored the difference in infestation levels before we clean, after we clean, and after we disinfect the units, and there's a big change. You get rid of 99% of the contamination there if you do a thorough job of the rough cleaning, which is using things like this scraper or these hand tools to scrape the majority of loose soil and plant debris off. And then you come in with a pressure washer unit like this one here. 3,000 psi, 4.5 gallons a minute is a good combination of pressure and water volume. And once we're done the rough cleaning and the fine cleaning or the pressure washing, we've got that equipment 99% clean. You cannot see any visible soil or plant material left on there. There may be a thin film of soil, which is where we use a disinfectant, and we've experimented with different disinfectants. The ones that we find work the best are the oxidizer materials like sodium hypochlorite, which is bleach, and Hyperox, which is a peroxide product. Almost all of the products that we've looked at will kill the clubroot spores to some extent, but the oxidizers are the best. The thing though is that they can only be used on clean equipment because they react with soil and organic matter, so you've got to do step 1, step 2 really well. And then they've also got to sit on the surface in a wet form for at least 20 minutes, which means you might have to reapply them to keep that surface wet. This is not the kind of weather that you want to be out disinfecting equipment in. You got to do it early in the morning, late at night when it's still, pull it into a machine shed out of the sun and spray it on. It needs to have that dwell time of at least 20 minutes. So we've had this machine all over the province doing trials. We had it in Edmonton last week at the International Clubroot Workshop and demonstrated it there to about 170 people who were at that conference, and stressing the importance once again of sanitization. And really with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency rolling out the on-farm biosecurity program now for cereal and oilseed producers, in the manuals that come out with the program, there's some in the tent there at the registration desk, There, of course, Clubroot is mentioned in those guides several times. And if you're cleaning up your equipment, you're not only taking care of Clubroot, but you're not bringing blackleg and sclerotinia. If you're worried about fusarium head blight in southern or central Alberta, you're not bringing that onto your farm. It's a broad brush approach to reducing levels of diseases, insects, and weeds. Just by cleaning your equipment, you're getting those three benefits. And for a lot of people, their biggest concern is weeds, bringing in some sort of exotic weed. So cleaning equipment and vehicles and making sure custom operators, if they're coming to your farm, come on there with clean equipment. Oil and gas industry, electrical suppliers like ATCO, it's putting the transmission lines in now. They all have Clubroot risk mitigation protocols where they minimize vehicular traffic, they clean and disinfect, they know the status of the sites that they're building on, all of that beforehand. Spending millions of dollars in Clubroot risk mitigation, those companies. Actually, they're going beyond what we're doing in the agriculture side, to be honest with you. They're very particular, and they spend a lot of time, effort trying to prevent the spread of Clubroot and other diseases and weeds. Okay, any questions before, I think Mike wants to walk you down to the glyphosate plots there, but any other questions on Clubroot?
Why are they spending so much? Is it the threat of lawsuits that who would be suing the council?
It's a concern by the landowners. They don't want disease, insects, and weeds on their farm. So they're just simply saying, yes, you can work on my farm, but I want you to clean your equipment. I don't want you bringing Clubroot from Leduc County to my farm. So it's a matter of liability and insistence. And in fact, in the contracts they sign with the producers, they'll often say up front, you know, we have a risk mitigation protocol here for pests. This is what it is. Even before the grower opens their mouth and starts talking about it. It's just part of doing business. They don't want to be in a liability situation. Okay, any other questions? No? Well, thank you very much for your time and enjoy the rest of your tour. You're welcome to look around the trailer if you want. We have an air compressor there. We use that a lot around instrument panels, sensor arrays, and so on, where you can't pressure wash. The air pressure, it works well, and we have a long wand that we use here. We've seen producers buy these air compressors like you use to blow out your irrigation systems. They'll buy one of those at an auction for $1,000 or so, and they'll rig up something like this, and they'll high pressure, high volume. They'll just blow the dust off of all their combines and everything to get rid of contamination. There's many ways to skin the cat. Okay.
But when you're doing this, you blow it off and then you disinfect, and you're doing it on the road. How are you mitigating the inoculum that you're putting
Ideally, what you're doing is you're doing this in the field where the contamination is. So you clean everything off in that field. Or you bring it into your yard where you have maybe a containment like a wash bay or something like that. What we'll often do is we have a big tarp in here, a stack tarp, and we can drive a 40-foot cultivator onto that tarp. We'll scrape it off, get our 100 pounds of soil, drive the machine off, and then we'll shovel that soil into the back of the truck, take it back to the field. We usually clean on grass areas that are non-crop areas. That's what we recommend, so that isn't tilled back into the field or driven over by equipment. It's at the exit to the field. You stop, you clean, and then you leave the field. And you take no contamination with you.
So, Ron, as a farmer, just say I don't have time to completely decontaminate, but I scraped all the soil off.
Yep.
Or how much would I reduce my risk at that point? Okay, you see it a little bit, we don't have it in soil that we know of.
Yeah.
But you're still posed with those questions. If a guy just took time to scrape all the mud off of the openers and stuff like that, do you think he could reduce it to a 90% level?
Yeah, you could. On a 40-foot...
Pretty high, just getting most of the soil.
Yeah, 40-foot cultivator, moderately soiled. We pulled about 100 pounds of soil off it. by doing the hand scraping here, we probably clean 90 to 95% of the contamination with step one, the rough cleaning. Then the pressure washing, we had it squeaky clean, couldn't find any soil on it. We're at the 99% level. And at that point, a lot of growers would say, that's good enough for me. Whatever spores are on there are too minuscule to really pose a risk, and on with business. Yeah. Tractors, you can get 300-400 pounds of soil on a tractor. Combines, all that chaff and litter on the combine, that straw has clubroot spores on it. Even if it's cereal straw, the mere act of combining, you stir up the soil and it gets mixed in with the seed and the straw. Got to be very careful if you take straw, what's that?
Jamie's like giving me the evil eye. I'm like, they already plowed.
Yeah. But that's the other way you can buy it onto your farm, is contaminated feed and straw. If somebody bales up canola straw or something like that. I better let you go.
You can platform again if you want. Why not?
Thanks.